Díl gwyt, Aidan a Hehir is Aidan dom, Conas Tátu. Tá an áras agus an áir orm a bheith an seo. Gur míle mágat agus a bheith an seo leo. I think probably Irish understands that. I'm Irish and it's very nice to be here and speak Oscoilia, as we say. They said to me when they sent the email around about what I could talk about, they said you can talk about anything you want. It doesn't have to be academic. And my mind immediately went back to an episode of Father Ted. I'm sure some of you have seen that, where he's given the Golden Cleric Award and he decides to use his speech as an opportunity to say all the things he doesn't like in the world. So I thought, well, maybe I should do that. So I've got about 250 different things I've written down here. Well, I think I'll only read a couple of them. My first one, people who answer questions by saying so. You all know that one? Yes. People who talk about having jet lag. That's one of my real bugbearers. Friendly matches in football. I mean, what's the point of that? Men eating. Can't abide that. I mean, are you interested in that? People feeding each other food. Again, not my favourite thing. Smiling would be one as well. My biggest one, I think, would be animals wearing clothes. I would date the end of the Western civilization, to when people started putting jumpers on dogs. While we were doing that here in Russia, they were eating raw meat and sharpening their bayonets, and we were putting clothes on animals. Anyway, as I said, if anybody wants the rest of the list, but I have an awful lot of people I want to thank. I'm going to talk about what good hope means later on. One of the key things with respect to good hope is what's called peer scaffolding. And I've been very lucky to have a number of people in my life who really helped me enormously. My grandfather died in 1985, and a few months after he died, his son, my uncle Noel, it was his wedding. And my father stood up to give the best man speech, and in the course of the speech, my father said, I hope that Paddy, his dad, my grandfather, is here with us today. And my grandmother shouted out, he is. And I really hope that she was right about that, because I hope my parents are here today, I hope my grandparents are here today, I hope Grandpa Nick is watching today as well. These are people who had a huge impact on my life. I'm very glad that there are some living people here today as well, watching out for me. I want to particularly thank my in-laws, Sue, Lucy, Emily, Chris, thank you for being here, thank you for taking me in. I didn't look like much when I first met them back in 2000, but they were very kind, pretended to understand what I was saying, and things went all right. I thank my family in Ireland, Niall and Niamh, and I particularly want to thank all the people in my family over the centuries who were never awarded degrees, were never invited to make speeches, all the people who grew up in poverty in Limerick, who took their children to school every day in the Limerick rain. I'm very, very conscious of how the job that I have is one that I'm very lucky to have. I love the job that I have. And I know that an awful lot of my family didn't have jobs that they particularly enjoyed, but they did them anyway. Throughout the last few years, I've had this picture on my desk to remind me of that. This is a picture of my grandmother when I made my first Holy Communion. Some of you from Ireland might understand what that means. And behind there is the lanes of Limerick, the famous lanes of Limerick. And I had that picture on my desk to remind me of all those people who didn't, as I say, have the opportunities that I had. I'm certainly not the smartest person in my family. I'm not the most hard-working person in my family, but I've had opportunities that other people didn't have. And I think back to all the people who didn't have those opportunities because of poverty and discrimination. And I'm very glad that I can represent them here today. And I would like to particularly thank my mother, Mary, who you can see here in, I think she was 15 or 16 at the time, who encouraged me all the way as well, and it was a glimmer of light in a very dark time in Limerick often, but always encouraged me to try and fail and try again. I want to thank my colleagues at the University of Westminster. I moved here, as Divya said, from the University of Sheffield. I was there for 2 years. It was a great university, everything worked, and yeah, but it was very conservative, very hard to get any sort of leadership positions. And then I moved down here. I started here at the same time as Divya and Tom. Where's Tom gone? Tom was there, yeah, Tom. Tom was here as well. And I think it's fair to say it was a difficult start. There was a lot of things that needed to be worked on. I remember Tom teaching a module on classical warfare, which we inherited. But we inherited a system that maybe wasn't as well managed as it could have been. And immediately, we were invited to take a leading role in that. And I became undergraduate course leader, and later PhD course leader, and then AA course leader. And these were all opportunities that I had at the University of Westminster that I probably wouldn't have had so quickly at the University of Sheffield. And trying to do admin and teaching and research, very, very difficult, but very, very important as well, very, very rewarding. I've organised an awful lot of events here at the University of Westminster, and it's always been quite easy to do so. I know there's a lot of you here who've been to those events or have been involved in organising them as well. I just wanted to highlight one thing in particular. I know Alan Porter, the head of school, can't be here tonight, but you know, in March 2025, I was asked to help organise an event with a charity at this university, and I said to Alan, is it okay, can you help us out? And straight away Alan replied saying, yes, you can, and here's what we can do to help. And I remember talking to my colleague at a different university and saying, we've got the green light ready to go, and the email she sent back was, thanks for sorting things out so quickly. Your university seems to be really responsive and very supportive, which was a great affirmation, and that's certainly been my experience. I want to really thank all the staff. I'm not going to start naming people individually, but you know, we have a really, within PIR, great diverse range of research interests and really cutting edge, strange things that we do. It's very enlightening for me to engage with people to do such wonderful things, and such a great commitment to teaching as well. I want to thank as well, you know, specifically some people, because they helped me enormously with my professorship application. Alan Porter was fantastic. Roland Dan Reuter, again, I know can't be here tonight, was brilliant as well. And Sarah Raphael, thank you very much for all the help that you gave. When I was a PhD student, I gave a PhD student presentation, the first time I gave a presentation to my peers. And somebody, you know, senior academic, tore apart my presentation, absolutely made a hames of it, as we'd say in Ireland. That was Neil Robinson, and he then became my PhD supervisor, and I really needed that at that time. And I remember coming home to Sarah, shaving off all my hair, saying, that's it, I'm done. But it was one of those moments where you gotta pick yourself up, ultimately. And there was lots of moments like that when I was trying to work out whether I could do this. I came to the first international conference I attended was in July 2004. And I remember going to this conference, and all the other PhD students had suits and ties on, and business cards, which I didn't have. And I thought, my God, I'm in the wrong place. And I'd emailed a couple of academics before and asked them if they would meet up and just talk to me about my PhD and all that, and very few people replied. 2 people did. One of them was James Gow at the King's College London, who spent time with me talking about it. The other was an academic who really didn't look at all like an academic. Smoked rollies, drank like a fish, so I immediately liked him. And that was David Chandler, with a huge impact on my career at the time, and really helped me enormously, not just with academics, but also turned me on to the fall, which I'll always be grateful for. So thank you very much, Dave. It's great to see you here as well. Where am I gone? I've lost my, oh yeah, here we go. I also want to thank my students. Over the years I've had the honour of teaching many fabulous students, and these are just a couple of snapshots of various things that I've done with them over the years. You know, one on the far left there is a picture of us at my face looks enormous there, isn't it? That's one of the MA student quizzes that I ran for a number of years. The top right is a picture of a group of students I took to some of you will recognise it, I'm sure, the Kosovo Embassy in London. They're undergraduate students I took there a couple of years ago, and they really had a great experience talking to people who work in the real world. And then here, probably one of my most favourite moment with students, and I'm very pleased the three of you are here tonight. We went to Kosovo. This is in Mitrovica. We took a group of students for the past 2 years to Kosovo. You know, I bore my students to death about Kosovo. Kosovo's fabulous, Kosovo. You know, if you want to study anything, study Kosovo. But also it's an amazing place. But we went there and they had a great time, and it was, you know, a fantastic opportunity for me as well to see, you know, how these, you know, my students could engage with people. I'll come on to talk about that later on as well. But you know, that's been a huge benefit over the years as well. The students that we have here and that we can really make a huge difference to. I was talking to my wife about that recently, how well we do in terms of the added value that the University of Westminster brings. I also want to thank Susie Robson, that some of you might remember many years ago was the administrator here, absolutely brilliant woman. I want to thank Kay Yardley for all the incredible work that she does. Dominica Aprihal as well, thank you very much Dominica. And Katrina McAnally, thank you for all the wonderful work that you've done over the years as well. Katrina has become, you know, one of my great friends, so thank you very much for everything you've done, Katrina. You've been absolutely fantastic. I also want to thank all my friends who I'm not going to list now, but particularly a lot of my friends who, for various different reasons, will remain anonymous. I really want to thank my family. This is a picture of my wife Sarah, my daughters Esme, Elsie and Iris in Albania, on top of one of the bunkers in Albania. And I often look at that picture and think just how lucky I am. You know, what an incredible family I have to allow me to drive them around these countries. So I'm going to talk about that a bit later on. 24 years ago, this day, 24 years ago, Sarah and I were doing this. This is our daughter Esme, who is there. So happy birthday, Esme. Probably the worst way to spend your birthday. Yeah, we blessed to have Esme in our lives, and she recently graduated with MA in biomedicine. Also, say a big thank you to Elsie, who's come down from the University of Manchester, where she's studying drama and English, and regularly texts us at 6 o'clock in the morning to say she's just come back from the nightclub. And Iris, our youngest, who is studying law, politics, and religion. I don't know where she got those interests from, and wants to one day work for the UN and change it for the better, and I'm sure she will. I want to, in particular, say thank you to Sarah, who is my wife and has been always an infinitely better role model for our kids than I am. She's all the things I'm not. She smiles, she's friendly, she talks to people, and she's optimistic. And through all the many ups and downs and outs that we've had in Limerick and Medway, she's been there. She was at my very first academic talk. I don't know how long ago that was, but she came to that. And Sarah loves Kosovo as much, if not more than me. And had a play on called The Shadow Garden in Kosovo a couple of years ago. And again, that's something that we really, you know, loved sharing an interest in. The different friends that you have, the different friends that I have. She writes beautiful poems and plays that speak to ordinary acts of human kindness and solidarity, and to truths and to outrages, and to the celebration of life in all its messy glory. She once wrote a poem called Soulmate, which I'd like to read to her. Worship is the taste of you, soul food for the aching. For divine is the crush of hands held in hands and urgent yearnings, frantic canticles to paradise of fire and flames. Thank you. I was also asked to say something about my academic career. Thankfully, I'm sure a lot of you understand this as well. Unlike my kids, I grew up in an era where we didn't really take pictures of us when we were students. But I did manage to find a couple, and I thought it's a good idea to embarrass myself for this. There we go. This is me when I was a student. The picture on the left. God bless my mother, I told her I wanted a Nirvana t-shirt for Christmas. And she bought me an Oasis t-shirt. I think you can make it out there, but I scribbled underneath it, "our crap." I wore that around the place, and I remember her saying to me, "What's the difference?" But yeah, I wasn't a very good student, let's put it like that. I went to university with three aims really. To get wasted, to start the communist revolution, and to have lots of passionate affairs. Unfortunately, for the workers of the world and the good women of Galway, I was so good at the first one that I completely failed in the other two. When I was an undergraduate student and I told my kids this, I don't know why I told my kids this, but anyway, I did. I told at one stage one of my lecturers, it was the end of the year, I literally had attended no lectures. And the lecturer came down to me at the end of the class and said, "We thought you were dead." You're still here, what's going on? I managed to scrape through my undergraduate. I did an MA in international security, and my parents were like, "Okay, great, thankfully now he's qualified to do something sensible." And I said, "I'm going to go to America. I'm going to work as a carpet cleaner." And I thought, "Oh my God, okay," which is what I did. Then I came back from America and I said, "I'm going to do a PhD." And then they thought, "Fantastic, this is great. Now he's going to settle down, everything's going fine." I had a bit of money saved up from when I was in America, so I went over to Manchester for the weekend to meet a friend of mine. Came back from Manchester and said to my parents, I'm actually going to move to Manchester. I've met this girl, I've fallen in love with her, so I'm moving over there. And again, my parents were like, "Oh, shit." But anyway, I did it, and they were happy they met Sarah, and then immediately their allegiances changed from me to Sarah. And everything worked out very well. But I wasn't a very good student. So there's hope for everybody. There's still a picture of me here, let me get rid of that. Okay, in terms of reflections on my contribution, I think there's a few things worse than men talking about themselves. Sarah wrote a poem again called "When All the Men Are Dead." It's a short and sweet poem. "Only when there are no XY left will the airwaves honour the exploits of XX." Which I think is very apt. When I was thinking about what I could say about my contributions, I was thinking, well, what have I done? What do I tend to do? And I think I was looking back and thinking I was always the person in the room who would say things like, "That's not as good as you think it is. That plan won't work. Why is everyone so excited about this?" One of my books is called "Rhetoric and Reality," and a journal article called "Sound and Fury Signifying Nothing." I'm thinking, why have I done it? Why was I always that guy saying this isn't working and it won't work? I think a lot of it has to do with being born in Limerick. There's a saying in Ireland called "Remember Limerick in the Broken Treaty." This was in 1691. I don't want to get all nationalistic about it now, but the dreaded English signed a treaty with the Irish in 1691 and almost immediately broke in Limerick. So Limerick kind of instilled in you this idea that, don't take people's word for it. Be skeptical about everything. It's shit until you prove otherwise. But I also grew up in the 1990s in Limerick. I became a teenager in 1990, and that was a time when Ireland was really changing quite a lot. And there was people like Mary Robinson, who went on to become president of Ireland, went on to work for the UN, and she began to talk differently about what was happening in Ireland. And thankfully there was also Sinead O'Connor, who began to also say, "This isn't right, that's not right. What's happening in Ireland is not, leprechauns. Something is going wrong here. The church, the government, the businesses, the banks." And that instilled in me that kind of skepticism, that questioning attitude, these powerful women who were, telling it as it is. And I've been to so many talks and panels as an academic, where I've thought, I should probably say something, I should say something. And another voice in my head would say, "No, don't cause a scene, just be nice, just leave it." But I just couldn't shake the other voice that would say to me, "Remember Limerick." What would Mary Robinson say? What would Sinead O'Connor say? And it's always been amazing to me to see how brittle and weak supposedly powerful people are, how their position is largely a function of servility and intimidation, and how quickly and easily this can all be swept away just by asking a question. The confidence of mediocre white men is enormous, but the depth behind it is quite shallow. And that led me to think about this idea of constructive skepticism, and to think again about my contribution to that. A lot of what I wrote about relates to the whole idea of the end of history, about the role of international law, about humanitarian intervention, about state building, and about transitional justice. And the stated aims of all these things were not problematic. They all sounded good. The ideas and practices advanced in this period, however, seem to lack any real strategy, and to be based on a mixture of hubris and hypocrisy. Certain states declared themselves to be the new global judges who would police the world. A framing of the world was created whereby the West was presented as a garden and the rest as a jungle, and this was a terrible simplification. The solution to the world's problems seemed to be benevolent Westerners taming the savage, and this of course had echoes of colonialism. And we, Irish, were depicted as savage apes in the 19th century, so I know a little bit about it. And was the West deserving of this exalted status just because the Soviet Union had collapsed? I felt it was based on fundamentally problematic assumptions that the Western system worked and should be exported, that this system, that the Western states that presented this system would do the right thing because they were instinctively minded to do so, and if they weren't, then global civil society would convince them to. And that the agency of locals in the target country was merely to comply with Western instructions, that the West could be trusted to behave morally, albeit illegally. And my questions that I generally asked about this was why, when the West was so uniquely powerful, was there no effort to reform the UN, change inequitable global trade relations that cause so much poverty and conflict? Could Western states be afforded a new right of humanitarian intervention or preemptive self-defense without abusing this right? Can Western actors land in a foreign country, assume governance of this country and govern competently? What role for the locals? Why do Western states demand that others engage in transitional justice while refusing to do so themselves? If the system is not reformed, will new powers not rise and claim the same privileges that the West now claims for itself? And my view has always been that morality is essential. It's a good thing. It informs law, but it's not a substitute for law. Morality is easily abused, law less so. Progress is therefore dependent not on good people claiming to be acting in accordance with morality, but on all the people becoming tied into a legal order that can consistently enforce its laws. And I would go back to people like Reinhold Niebuhr talking about why we have democracy. It's not because we're good, it's because we know we're not good, and we need a system that ensures that our instincts are held in check. And my skepticism reached its zenith with respect to the responsibility to protect. This was an idea that swept across the academic world. To question it was to be cast as an opponent of human rights and justice. Academia very quickly proved to be just like every other industry. Supporting R2P was essential for career progression. A group of men came to establish themselves at the top of this industry, and they determined who were rewarded and who was punished, and it became like a religion. It had holy books, prophets, revered figures, institutions, key moments, and the faith in the future where evil would be vanquished. Claiming that R2P worked was key to academic progression, and money flowed towards those who aligned themselves with this narrative. But from the beginning, I thought this is all nonsense. How could anyone expect that this norm would change the world if in fact it actually changed nothing? There were no new laws, no new procedures, nothing beyond the articulation of a slogan. And I argued it was like a black hole, sucking everybody in. Anybody that studied these issues had to align themselves with R2P. Alternatives did exist, which were much more likely to work, but they were obscured by the responsibility to protect. I argued it was sound and fury, signifying nothing. And unfortunately, I was right. As every year a new atrocity was added to the list of atrocities R2P had not prevented or stopped, this became increasingly obvious. And thus a chasm existed between the mountains of books, special issues, and successful funding projects that heralded R2P's remarkable contribution and the real world, where mass atrocities increased after R2P was established. But certain people just didn't want to tell the emperor that he was naked. Certain people didn't want to remove themselves from a lucrative cash cow. It starkly highlighted just how detached academia can be, how debased the system had become when it didn't matter whether what you wrote was true or even if you believed it. What mattered only was that it was published. I won the 2019 Visa Prize for my book on R2P, and then I said, I'm done. I'm leaving this debate. Mainstream academic conferences started to look to me like a waste of time. They seemed to be akin to the last days of the Roman Empire. I remember being at an ISA conference in America one time and looking down at the foyer and seeing all the people crawling around each other. It looked like a networking event, shaking hands and genuflecting and exchanging compliments and pats in the back and forging networks of nepotism. There appeared to be very little engagement with real people. There was no interest in impelling policy change or the creation of new systems. No effort to impact on the general public. Very little questioning of orthodoxy. It was a hellish vision of excess and impotence. I think about people like Edward Said, who said that intellectuals should not become merely a faceless professional, a competent member of a class just going about his or her business. He said they should be an individual endowed with a faculty for representing, embodying, and articulating a message, to raise embarrassing questions, to confront orthodoxy and dogma rather than reproduce them, to be someone who cannot easily be co-opted by governments or corporations, and whose raison d'etre is to represent all those people and issues that are routinely forgotten or swept under the rug. And I absolutely agree with his views back then and still do now. We have such a privileged position as academics. I feel it's our duty to engage with the public. It's our duty to engage with ordinary people. But having said all these nasty things about academia, why am I still here? There's two reasons. One of them is Kosovo. Another embarrassing picture of the kids. This is our daughters in prison. I think this was around, I don't know exactly what it was, 2012, 2013, judging by how small they were back then. I did my PhD on neighbours intervention in Kosovo in 1999, but it wasn't really about Kosovo. It certainly didn't engage with real people. Kosovo was a case study. Later on, I worked on state building in Kosovo, but again, the focus was on state builders rather than people in Kosovo. But then I started to go regularly to Kosovo when I was invited there by somebody who I met at a conference who disagreed with everything I said, Hehir. He said, okay, if you think you know all about Kosovo, then come over and I'll get you to meet the president. So I went to Kosovo and interviewed the president. And I heard the stories of what the people of Kosovo had done in the 1990s. And then in 2012, I was invited to teach on a summer school over there. And it was after one particular lesson when I was sitting on Mother Teresa Street in Pristina, when I saw all these little girls running out of the National Theatre, dressed as ballerinas. They were only about the same age as Iris was back then, 4 or 5. And it really struck me that all these little girls would have lived a very, very different life had it not been for what had happened. And that also their lives ahead of them were still in significant doubt. And I thought, this is an incredible place. And I brought my family there. And they loved it. A few more embarrassing pictures. This is my kids and my wife at the Field of the Blackbirds, as is known. The famous battle happened in 1389. I brought my kids there and we went around horse riding. This isn't the time when Martin the horse nearly killed you, as well. This is before it. So it wasn't all plain sailing. But to see my kids enjoying this wonderful place was fantastic. To meet up with friends that they made in Kosovo, to put a face on people, to see Dua and Milosa and Yara and all the other friends that we made over there was fantastic. However, by about 2015, when we've been going quite regularly, all my friends in Kosovo wanted to leave. Something was going wrong there. As much as we loved it, something was going wrong. There was a corrupt elite in power in Kosovo, and there was also the internationals in power in Kosovo. And they kept saying the same thing to the people. Everything is working fine. We're making progress. We're going to join the EU. We're we're going to get jobs, we're going to get visas. And every year, that didn't happen. And then this wonderful underground existed that Sarah initially plugged into. Artists, playwrights, journalists, writers. People who described Kosovo in their own words as the unwanted corner of Europe. And because it was unwanted, and because nobody looked at them, they could write whatever they wanted. And this amazing art and literature emerged within Kosovo. And there was also a political party that sprayed graffiti on the walls all around Kosovo. And one day, I think it was in 2014 or 2015, I was invited by someone I'd never met before called Vittoria Pizzoli to meet for dinner and talk about what was happening in Kosovo. And we got up quite well, and she said, why don't you come next week and speak to the party itself? So I went and spoke to the party, and I met Saranda Ogievsi and somebody called Aidan. And these people were described to me by my international friends in Kosovo as radicals who would never amount to anything. These were people who had been arrested and put in jail. They'd been demonized by the press. How could they possibly achieve anything when the political elite, the media, and the judiciary, the EU and the US were working against them? However, around 2016, the world realised that things were turning badly wrong. We had Brexit, we had Trump. In Kosovo, people also realised that they began to realise they'd been lied to. In 2017, the World Bank described Kosovo as an archetypal case of state capture. How could this have happened? After 18 years of international-led statehood. But the people of Kosovo chose not to leave or engage in extremism. They chose to stay and dance and write and sing and paint and act and fight and tell the truth. And the people who had become my friends began to be listened to more and more by the public. And they turned against the corrupt elite, and the arrogant internationalists lost control. And this is a picture of me in Taverna Tirona around 2015, 2016, with some of these people. The man in the middle is Albuquerque, who's now the Prime Minister of Kosovo. The woman on the right is Saranda Ogievsi, who's now the Minister for Culture and Tourism in Kosovo. The woman beside me is Fortuna Sheremetti, who's part of the defence team at the Specialist Chambers in The Hague. These are people who refused to comply, who challenged the system and became the largest party in 2017 and have been consistently the largest party ever since then, which is a testament not just to them, but to the people of Kosovo, and all around the world other people were choosing to support violent, hateful extremists. And I always remember when they first came into government, I was invited to go to Kosovo on the 17th of February for Independence Day. And I was sat beside Vittoria Pizzoli, and the parade of police and military was going past. And when one particularly heavily armed unit was going past us, she nudged me and said, those are the guys who in 2013 raided our offices and arrested us. And she was sat there now as the government, watching these people walking past. It was an extraordinary moment. And I concluded my book on Kosovo with this, and I firmly believe it. We tend to think about these places as being places we need to go and provide them with our expertise. In fact, it's the other way around. Through their struggle, the people of Kosovo have exemplified the tenacity and resilience required to preserve the principles of justice, democracy and equality. By stark contrast, their erstwhile Western allies have abandoned these principles and in so doing flaunted their own moral bankruptcy. In a complete inversion of the relationship that existed in June 1999, if there is any hope for the principles upon which the West claims to base itself, it is that the West now learns how to exercise and sustain democracy from the people of Kosovo. Kosovo is an inspiring place that restores your faith in humanity. The Albanians, in many respects, the Albanians are the new Irish. In the last 3 or 4 years in the UK, the depiction of Albanians has been despicable, but it reminds me of what people used to say about the Irish in the 50s and the 60s. And I've been very lucky to work with a number of fantastic Albanian organisations in Kosovo and Albania. The British Albanian Culture and Arts Organisation, See Timor's at the back of the room. The British Albanian Women's Network. Aidan is here as well. But Kosovo is also under threat. Serbia continues to claim that Kosovo is part of Serbia, and the West increasingly appeases Serbia. Russia has designs on the whole region, and what happens next in Kosovo will be indicative of a much broader trend. And I'm very pleased that myself and a number of people from Kosovo have started an organisation within London called the Future for Kosovo Initiative, where we're trying to raise the profile of Kosovo within the UK, with Aidan and with Sabri and Jakob. Beyond Kosovo, the other thing that's restored my faith in what I do is a book that I wrote, not an academic book. So much of what we write as academics nobody ever reads. And you wonder why you do it. I went to a conference in 2019 in Sarajevo with Elizabeth's PhD student, Claudia Lanza. I was the second supervisor. And it was a typical academic conference. So the next day I said, I'm not staying any longer. I want to go and visit Srebrenica. Srebrenica is the site where the genocide in 1995 happened. And I got into a car and I drove there with a man called Mustafa, who was my tour guide for the day. And he had a profound impact on my life. And when I came back, I remember saying to my wife, I feel like I have to write about this. And I said, nobody will ever read it, but I feel like I have to write it. Long story short, it was eventually published, incredibly. And I was able to write that book, have it published, have it illustrated by one of my favourite artists, David Franklin, and give money then from the book, all the proceeds from the book, to charity. And through that then, we had impact and we had engagement. I gave talks at libraries and museums and art centres and exhibitions. I became involved with the charity Remembering Srebrenica. I got them to come here to the University of Westminster and put on events. Put on events with the Bosnian Embassy. We had an event here with 2 survivors of the Srebrenica genocide. And then a couple of years after the book was published, I got an email from somebody saying, I think I'd like to turn the book into a play. I thought she was out of her mind. I said, it's a book about 2 guys in a car. It's not going to work on stage. She said, no, don't worry about it. I've got ideas. Wonderful Lara contacted me. And it became, somehow, this book became a play, Flowers of Srebrenica. Legal Aliens Theatre put the play on with actors from Bosnia and Rwanda and Ukraine and Ireland. And it toured. We put it on in Sarajevo on the 30th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide. Then we went to Tuzla. And then we went to Belgrade in Serbia. And I said, I'm not going there, it's too dangerous. And my wife said, well, I'm going. And I said, you are not. And of course she went. Then it came to London. Then it went to Oslo and Pisa. And suddenly there was ambassadors coming to this play. And the BBC was there. And survivors came to the play. Survivors of the genocide. Who said, thank you. And it's been nominated for 2 Off-Broadway awards. And the single best thing that happened in the course of putting on that play was that the guy that I met, Mustafa, in 2019, I managed to find him again, and I contacted him the night before the play was on. I said, you won't remember me, but 6 years ago, you took me to Srebrenica. And tomorrow, in your hometown, there's a play about you. He was like, what? And I said, just come to the War Theatre. And he came. And I met him again. And what a fabulous man he was. You know. And it was a joy to link up with him and to meet all the other people at Bosnia. And this is the kind of thing that, again, restored my hope, restored my interest in academic research. And ultimately, what links all this is my current research on hope and despair. Obviously, the world has become very dark. Students and my kids often say to me, what's going on? Is it all going wrong? Is there any hope? And counterintuitively, my argument is, hope isn't always good. Sometimes despair is good. And I wrote a book about it. And in the book I argue that hope is essential, but it can be dangerous. We live in a system where we have what somebody described once as a tyranny of optimism, where everybody has to pretend to be happy and everybody has to say everything is going great and I'm brilliant. You can do it. You can do anything. I've been to lots of talks. I was a parent governor at one of my kids' schools. Talks, people who come in and say, you can do it, just have to hope. You can't. The biggest thing that I wanted to do in my life for years was play for Liverpool. I couldn't do it, not because I didn't have the opportunities or that I just wasn't good enough. There's some things I can't do, we can't do. That false hope is not good for anybody. And likewise, hope can act as a pacifier. We keep telling people to hope about something next year to divert them away from what's happening today. And that was used by the corrupt elite in Kosovo, where keeping people passive was only possible by constantly encouraging them to focus on the future, always this glorious future. And this led to, as I describe in the book, wishful hopers and willful hopers. And it led to exploitation and misrule. But rather than just say nasty things about hope, I engaged with the arguments of Victoria McGeer, and she talked about how to hope well. And she said that hoping well requires that we do more than just focus on hoped for ends. We must articulate a plan. We need to have what she described as imaginative scaffolding. Hope must be rational. We must avoid unrealistic optimism. We must also appreciate the need for, she described it as peer scaffolding, which is external assistance, people who will help you, but also people who will criticize you. How important it is that somebody is telling you what you're doing is wrong. Hope must be also fundamentally accompanied by action, so that, in her words, it transforms into a way of actively confronting, exploring, and sometimes patiently biding our limitations as agents, rather than crumpling in the face of their reality. To hope well is to experience ourselves as agents of potential, which boils down to see the world as it is and act with others to change it, like the people of Kosovo did. And then the point about despair. How do we engage with the world without falling into despair? And the work that I've done demonstrates that a lot of people think you should embrace it. Embrace despair. The Irish writer Samuel Beckett is often described as somebody who focuses too much on despair. But Fintan O'Toole recently discussed his work and said, in Beckett we see the dead and find them making a mockery of their own non-existence. So it's not dwelling on the dead and ghosts and despair. It's engaging to make them less frightening. Frustration and loss and defeat create despair, of course they do, but that's not the end. Engaging with and acknowledging despair does not mean stagnation, it means revelation. And that's something I've experienced in my personal life as well. Looking towards the dark side of humanity fills you with images of profound suffering, but these experiences can compel action and meaningful engagement. Recently I wrote an article about this woman, Federica Circasi in Kosovo, whose children and husband were killed in 1999. She still hasn't found their bodies. She sets the table for them. She did every day for a long time, and now it's on the anniversary of their disappearance. She is a woman in despair. But what I wrote about in this context, based on her, is that despair is a necessary stage, but it does not lead to inaction. It leads to solidarity, and solidarity is ultimately the solution. When we see this, we can become capable of solidarity, because these people do not want pity or condensation, they want action. There's a great passage from another Irish writer, Francis Stewart, talking about that, how we need to understand ourselves before we can engage with other people. He writes, "We are alone and the world is convulsed in its own struggle that has nothing more to do with us at all. Here too, there is a new truth that I have discovered, or rather that I may always have known, but now have experienced. It is that only through a certain solitariness can man ever come into contact with his fellow man. First, he must have within himself that sense of being alone, of being aloof from all the turmoil of society in general, before he can love disinterestedly. He must be able to stretch his hand from his own lonely self towards this other lonely and pitiful being. He must, for the moment anyhow, be able to see the both as two solitary and very vulnerable creatures, hastening towards that common destiny which neither can contemplate without a tinge of fear. Only in such moments comes the realization of that brotherhood of man that no catch cry can ever make living. And what it boils down to is this need to engage with real people. And the moments when I think back on my career that I remember most are not my publications. The moments I remember are the little girls running down Mother Teresa Street in Pristina. It's my students getting degrees. It's my students getting jobs and further qualifications. It's bringing my students to Kosovo and watching them mix with local students. It's going to my students' book launch, in Elisa's case, twice. She's written 2 books since she was my student. It's going to Jakob's book launch. It's going to Aidan's book launch. It's attending Sarah's play in Kosovo. It's watching an audience watch a play my wife wrote about our friend. It's watching my children play with Albanian children. It's watching my children attending marches about Black Lives Matter, Ukraine and Gaza. It's bringing food and clothes in my wife to a refugee camp. It's attending the Hehir Milosevic trial in 2002 and hearing Sharita Berisha confront Milosevic about the crimes he committed. It's visiting Rachak in Kosovo, where a massacre occurred. It's visiting Srebrenica, where a massacre occurred. It's being here in this very room to hear a talk by Mevlida Lazili and Sarah Hukic, and watching my children hug these 2 women. It's the conversations I had with Saranda about what happened to her family. It's seeing the standing ovation at the play in Sarajevo. And it's the last week in Kosovo hearing Kimeta Haksoli talk about her father and her work today with the Kosovo Institute for Crimes Committed during the war. I've learned more from these people than from any book. And it relates too to my interest in punk music, the margins. The best way to understand if a system works is to ask the marginalised. Ask the poor, the queer, the trans, the disabled, the sick, the hungry, the unqualified, the refugees, the survivors, the families of the missing. The more interesting people are the ones who have no form of power. And there is beauty in the shadows. The best art is made by those who can't afford paper or lights or cameras, but who forge something beautiful anyway. The beauty hidden inside the ugly was, I think, best captured by Gerald Manley Hopkins when he wrote "Blue, bleak embers, all my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion." And finally, it occurs to me that what we need is action. When they had a Roman triumph in the days of the Roman Empire, when the conquering Caesar would come through Rome on his chariot, getting the applause of the crowd, there was also somebody who stood behind him on the chariot, who would whisper in his ear, "Remember, you are only a man." And the idea was that you would always have a check on the excess of power. There's a need to always say that the emperor is naked, that the system is flawed. History is full of people who stood up and were knocked down, were ignored and reviled, and then became the heroes of tomorrow. Think about Hannah Arendt writing about the Danes refusing to hand over the Jews in the Second World War. The women of Ireland who exposed sexual abuse in the church and the Magdalene laundries. If more people spoke up in solidarity, there would have been no Nazis, no invasions, no colonialism, no genocides, no Magdalene laundries, no Epstein, no Trump. And the point then is to turn, I think, empathy into rage and rage into action. So it's not enough simply to say this isn't working, but to also prescribe. And that's where the constructive part of my constructive skepticism comes in. And I've tried in my publication to talk about that, to talk about the difference between idealism and utopianism, to say it's okay to write about something that may not be possible now, but might be possible in the future, and to preserve that, including UN reform, including inclusive governance. While we can't individually change everything, we can leave a mark. We can reach across the void and show solidarity and do something. At the very least, calling for change serves as a stain on the silence, and it's a gift to the future. In The Canticle for Leibovitz, one of my favourite novels, they preserve civilization for future generations. And I'll conclude with this. It's a saying that I first heard in Kosovo. When the fox's tail is burning, he thinks the whole world is on fire. The idea being that your present hardship does not mean the world is ending. It's not time to give up. And like despair, fire can be positive. When I was living in Limerick, the Clare Hills, I could see the Clare Hills out my back window. Every year they would burn the gorse bushes. They would burn these bushes, huge flames, fire, smoke, because they wanted new growth to emerge. Think about the Great Fire of London, what a wonderful thing that was in the long term. My daughter Iris and I recently went to see the UN Secretary General speaking in London. He wasn't particularly impressive, but the UN General Assembly President was. And she, Annela Baerbock, talked about the fact that when the UN was founded in London first, they walked through the streets of London and there were still smouldering piles of ash. And from that came the UN. And we live in a world now where there are many men. And again, these men cry out for war and hate and money and acclaim and obedience and supplication. And again, there are many other men who cheer and bow and look away and say the right thing. And they are many, and they are loud, and they do have power. But rather than focus on all these awful men I've never met, I try to think about the great women I have met. Saranda, and Vittoria, and Fortuna, and Elizabeth, and Marigona, and Genta, and Leila, and Yeta, and Loreen, and Lara, and Anastasia, and Giovanna, and Anna, and Emma, and Rosafa, and Mariella, and Aida, and Marita, and Kimeta, and Sophie, and Sonia, and Nastasia, and Laura, and Teresa, and Judita, and Nita, and Sharetta, and Melvida, and Sarah, and Federina, and Emily, and Lucy, and Lola, and Neve, and Hazel, and Rita, and Katie, and Hannah, and Aisling, and Molly, and Sue, and Mary Clancy. And most of all, I think about Sarah, and Esme, and Elsie, and Iris. And these are people who see despair, and they stand up, and they engage with the marginalised, and they act, and hopefully they start fires. The end of the play, Emilia, concludes with a speech by a central character saying to all the women, if they try to burn you, may your fire be stronger than theirs, so you can burn the whole fucking house down. And so as we look to the future and see that something, as the Irish poet W.B. Yeats said, something dark is slouching towards Bethlehem and the centre cannot hold. While the world may burn, it need not be destroyed. Something new and better will rise from the ashes, borne on the shoulders of all those who spoke the truth, hoped well and acted. And I'll finish with the end of a poem by Sylvia Plath called Lady Lazarus. Hair God, hair Lucifer, beware, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. Gurv Mila Mahabat, Falman Derek, thank you very much.
But we have a surprise, and that's the only message you have to keep waiting here. So can I please invite Aida Hazili, who is from British Albanian Women's Association, to join me here, please.
Can I say something?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Aida Hazili. I teach at FCDO and International House, and I am director and founder of Albanian British Association. So I just want to thank you. First of all, I want to congratulate Aidan, Professor Aidan, on his achievement. And your achievement makes us so happy because you are a great supporter. I want to thank you for supporting Kosovo, for being a great asset, for being a great advisor to the Kosovo government, for helping people from Kosovo, for helping students, and for helping organizations like mine. So last year in April, we had a great event here in Westminster University. We brought our traditions here, Albanian tradition, the nation. We brought the nation here, Albanian nation. And this was thanks to Aidan. So I just want we have a very symbolic present, which is a symbol of Albanian nation. And this is for, do you come here, Aidan? So everyone can see, so this is yours now. Enjoy it, and thank you very much. Traditional clothes of Albanian nation. It's a waistcoat. So we wear this one over a white shirt, but it's a part of a costume. We couldn't bring the whole costume, but this is beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On that beautiful note, I invite all of you to join us for the reception. But once again, congratulations, Aidan, and thank you for the drinks, the snacks, and of course, here, Aidan. Whoever you want to speak to, thank you.